And I loved my job, and I was making the best money ever, and I didn't want to quit it. So the only way I could survive with myself in there was to become a closet vegan. I still carried my leather briefcase. I'd already bought that ahead of time. And I just pretended to be into health when people asked me about it. And I didn't tell them the real reasons, and that's how I survived in the industry. But at least I knew my personal food choices were not going to continue to drive this industry. There were a lot of ups and downs through this time. I met my husband, and we got married, and I became a presidential award winner, and they flew us both to a 5-star hotel in Hawaii for a week. It was pretty cool. But I was starting to see more about how the pharmaceutical industry controls the information that everybody's exposed to, how they influence policy and influence scientists and doctors. And I was coming home many days crying from the things I was seeing. It was like I had the golden handcuffs on. There was a lot I loved about my job, and there was a lot I hated. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I gave my 2 weeks' notice. And I was fortunate because we now had my husband's income, and we thought this might be a good time to start our family. So I left the job, and that was the end of my time with that Merc. About the time I put in my 2 weeks' notice, I heard that this man, Howard Lyman, was coming to town. Now, mind you, at this point, I thought of myself as a vegan, but I had never yet met another vegan in real life. And I heard about this man, Howard Lyman, a 4th-generation cattle rancher, feedlot operator who was getting $1 million checks for his cows when he had a health crisis, and it opened his eyes, and he realized he'd taken his family's organic farm and turned it into a nightmare industrial operation. He started rethinking things, and he vowed he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to undo the damage that he did. And now he was speaking around the country. He was talking about having gone vegan, why he did that. And I heard about his lecture, and I wanted so much to go. But I was terrified, because I still was thinking in the back of my mind, this is the only industry I'm qualified to work in and I'm trained for. And this is, you know, if we ever need the money, this is my source of income, and I'll probably go back to work in it. And I was scared to go see him, because by this time I'd heard so much rhetoric about the animal rights movement, about it being terrorists and misanthropic people. I was scared that if I went, I would be documented there somehow. And if I ever tried to apply for a job, I'd never be able to get it. But finally, I decided I had to go anyway, and I went and I met him, and he was an amazing speaker, and I learned a lot that really inspired me. Now, I've stayed in touch with Howard over the years, and here's what else he's saying today. He says the #1 issue in the world today is global climate change. And the one thing that each individual can do to make the biggest impact is to adopt a vegan diet. And here's why he's saying that. So this is a chart showing the greenhouse gas emissions in equivalent amounts of protein. So at the very bottom, you've got dry beans. So 1 ounce of protein from dry beans produces that amount of greenhouse gases. If you go up second from the top, you can see beef. It's 10 times more for the same 1 ounce of protein from beef. You produce a 10-fold increase in climate-changing greenhouse gases. And here's another chart, puts it a little different way. This is from WorldWatch, a German company, not a vegan company at all, comparing 3 diets. The standard American diet at the bottom, a vegetarian diet with dairy and eggs, and a vegan diet at the top. And the dark green is showing conventional, and the light green is showing organic of the same diet. And basically this is saying, how far could we drive a car emitting the same amounts of greenhouse gases as these different diets? So this is like car miles, producing equivalent amounts. So you can see at the very bottom, the conventional diet, if you change it out for all organic, you save a little bit. But if you cut the meat and dairy out and go back to conventional, you cut it in half. If you cut out all animal foods, it's just a fraction of what it starts out originally, even whether it's organic or not. And yet, given these facts, what is it? If we ever hear any of the environmental groups, any of the local natural foods co-ops in town or grocers talking about, when they talk about diet and its effect on climate change, what is it we hear from them? What are we admonished to do? Isn't it buy local? Is that the message that gets out? So let's take a closer look at what that means. So this pie chart is showing the greenhouse gas emissions embedded in food. And the large green circle shows that 83% of the carbon emissions in different foods is due to production. That's what I just showed you on that other chart. That's production. It depends on whether it's come from a plant or an animal, whether it's a ruminant. That affects that's 83% of the carbon emissions is what the food is. Less than 10%, actually 4%, is what can be impacted when we buy local, 4%. And it's worth noting that some of the local grass-fed products produced in this area, they're actually feeding their animals with alfalfa from California, shipped all the way in. And alfalfa is the most thirsty, water-sucking crop in California. It accounts for the majority of water used in California while they're having a drought. And that's part of what's behind some locally produced grass-fed products as well. So the sixth big event for us is when we get pregnant with our first child. Now, we love our midwife. She's amazing. But when she finds out I'm vegan, I've been vegan several years now, and I'm feeling great. It's working well for me, I think. She says, I've helped a few other vegans before, and she said, they haven't done well. You really need to add fish or chicken back to your diet. Now, this scares me, because while I'm confident in my vegan diet, I don't really know much about pregnancy or birth. This is my first. I haven't been around it that much. I still haven't met a single other vegan that's gone through a pregnancy. And so I get kind of scared, and I'm kind of we're nervous parents anyway. So I do the only thing I could do back then, because we didn't have the internet. I head straight to the medical library, and I want to see what information I can find out to tell me whether it really is safe or unsafe to be vegan while I'm pregnant. Well, there wasn't a lot at that time, but there was some. And what I discovered is that vegan pregnancies carry a much reduced risk of gestational diabetes, of hypertension, of eclampsia and preeclampsia. I find an article in New England Journal of Medicine, a letter from a researcher comparing the contaminants in breast milk of vegans with omnivores, and he finds that the highest levels of every contaminant tested in the vegan's milk is still lower than the lowest level in the omnivores. Anyway, there's a bunch of other stuff I find out. I make it through my pregnancy as a vegan. I stay vegan. Our babies, both of them, were healthy and fine. And after that, our midwife says to us, the other vegans I knew, they don't really eat like you, meaning whole foods. They were eating soda pop and chips.
Oh,
Oh,
So, as a mother of young children, and now successfully having been through a vegan pregnancy, there's another thing I'm thinking about too, besides just health. I'm thinking about the world my children are going to grow up in, and wanting that to be a world that is healthy emotionally and psychologically and has justice in it. And so I'm thinking more about veganism as a way to instill those values in my children. And I ended up putting all of this into my first book, Compassionate Souls, Raising the Next Generation to Change the World, which is now out of print, but there's lots of used copies on the internet, and the Lawrence Public Library has a copy as well. And I start speaking out publicly. I start sharing my information. Hospitals, grocery stores, they welcome me with open arms. They don't care how much I talk about the health, environmental, and ethical reasons for veganism. It's all good. Newspapers interview me, the morning shows in town interview me. Everybody's happy to hear my message. No problem. And the other interesting thing about this time, one of the cases I will make to people is I will say, well, what's the difference between a dog and a pig? Would you eat a dog? And they say, well, no, I would never eat a dog. I've loved dogs. And I say, well, what moral difference is there that differentiates a dog from a pig? If you think it's wrong to eat a dog, wouldn't it be just as wrong to eat a pig, to kill them unnecessarily if we can survive without it? And even if it doesn't persuade people to become vegan, it gets them thinking. It plants a seed. Then Howard Lyman is doing another worldwide tour, or nationwide tour, and he asked me if I can set up some venues for him here in the Midwest. And we weren't living in Lawrence at the time, I approached the Lawrence Community Mercantile. They've just built their new educational classroom, and they are thrilled. They've heard about Howard. They would love to have him come and speak. And they set it all up, and he comes and speaks. The talk is well attended. They love it. They realize they don't have anybody teaching vegan cooking classes. They hired me to start doing that at the Merc. It's all good. It's all going well. And I'm very happy teaching cooking classes there. Then something happens that I believe is the piece that starts to change all of this. So Howard comes back from talking about mad cow disease, of which he is now a recognized world expert, and I'd say he is more responsible than any other individual for the ban in this country on feeding cows to other cows. It's him. He was the one who put that out there. But he's just coming back from England. The Oprah Winfrey show catches him in the airport, gets him on their show, and he describes, at this point they were feeding cows to cows, and he says, and that's how we got mad cow disease in the UK. Oprah hears it. She says her famous statement, "It has just stopped me cold from eating another burger." Cattle futures plummet the next day, and a group of wealthy Texas cattle ranchers file a $20 million lawsuit against Howard and Oprah in Texas courts under a newly enacted law designed to stifle free speech. And that case winds on for over 6 years, being refiled after it got dismissed, appealed, till finally they got it dismissed with prejudice and it was over. But it's a great story. Howard has put all that in his book, Mad Cowboy. And it's a great book. I encourage you to read it if you can get a copy of it. But what people don't realize is the powerful chilling effect this case had, even though they ultimately won, on the news media. And I have seen it happen over and over. So things start to change. You start to see newspaper articles being way toned down and deliberately not sharing information about published research articles suggesting that we do have mad cow disease in this country. The Merc starts increasing their shelf space for meat, dairy, and eggs. And then one day, I get called into a private meeting there, and I get told, do not say anything disparaging about any items we sell here. I've never been told I can't say what I want to say in my classes before that. And it's obvious to me that this prohibition does not include sugar and genetically modified ingredients, of which the Merc sells both. It's obvious I'm the only one getting this instruction, and what they really mean is don't say anything about meat, dairy, and eggs. Now, the point I want to make in all this is that the people at the Merc, they are good people. I've known them a long time. I know the people on the board. I know the people running the store. They care about social justice, environmental sustainability. They do all kinds of great things in the community. But these are the people who are telling me to do this, and I know they believe that they are operating in the best interest of the Merc and the community by telling me this. So all of this gets me thinking about what is the fundamental challenge facing humanity. I'll give you a hint. It's this quote from Albert Einstein. "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing." So here is what I believe is our fundamental challenge. It is this, that we humans are capable of not seeing or ignoring injustice. And this is, in my mind, the fundamental challenge facing humanity. And we have many examples through history, right? I mean, you know history. You look at this and you say, look, a lot of the people who participated in pushing native peoples off the land, they thought they were doing the right thing. Many of them were church-going, they were often religious people. How could they not see the terrible injustice that they were committing against others? The same thing with what happened to Japanese Americans in this country during World War II. I mean, I've asked my parents about this many times. What were you thinking then, like when you saw this happening? And they were like, you know, nobody really even thought about it. I mean, we knew it was happening, but it wasn't even on their radar screen. And you know, every day, every culture teaches the people in that culture not to see specific injustices that privilege some while hurting others. We are all caught in it. My father grew up in Kansas City in the 1930s, and he tells me how he thought nothing of it when an elderly black woman had to give her seat up to him, a healthy white male. It had always been that way. It wasn't until the civil rights movement he could look back and then go, how did I not notice how wrong that was? But he couldn't see it. And so it makes me wonder, what are we not seeing right now? What have we all been so enculturated into? Ways of looking at the world, thinking about things that make it so we can't see the harms we may be perpetuating. More things are starting to change. I'm still speaking out, but one of the things I notice is that now more information about factory farms is out there, and it's becoming more well known, and now more people are trying to opt out of that by raising their own animals in their backyards, and they're getting chickens, still from commercial hatcheries. That's all the backyard chickens today. They still come from the commercial hatcheries, like I showed you earlier. I even know people raising their own cows for milk, and people are even slaughtering their own animals, and they are doing this because they believe it's an improvement over the factory farms and that they're doing something good. And at first, I agree with that, and I think, yeah, well, certainly this is a better life for these animals than what I saw in the industrial farms. But then something happens that makes me change my thinking on that. Because I'm starting to meet more young people who have been doing internships at these farms or just visiting them and helping out and getting involved. And now when I make the comparison about the dog and the pig, you know what they're saying to me? They say, you're right. There's no difference between a dog and a pig morally. They say, and I would just as soon eat a dog. It doesn't matter if I was in another country and they were serving dog, yeah, I'd eat dog. To me, this shows the desensitization that is spreading via people becoming more involved with the objectification and use and exploitation of other creatures. Does this bother you?
Terrible.
It's easy for us to see the injustice in that because nobody in this room has grown up in any way thinking their privilege, their benefits require this. What about this?
What kind of animal is that?
That's a dolphin.
Oh.
So you know, in some places in Japan, dolphins are hunted for their meat too. Right? And it's easy again for us to see the injustice and the violence in this, and it tugs at our heart because none of us see anything we're used to as connected with that. So what about this? Does that bother anybody in the room? Or this? What about when I show you the rest of the pictures that go with that? Because that's the part that is deliberately kept out of view so that we will continue to support and perpetuate the other. So I have a question for you. Do you agree that it is wrong to hurt animals unnecessarily? If you saw a little girl kicking a cat, a kitten, so that she could see the kitten scream and hiss and cower, and she just thought that was hilariously funny, and she's laughing, and you witnessed this, would you try to stop it? Would you try to speak up to the child and raise awareness? So what is the difference between that and people watching a dog fight? They get joy and pleasure from it. Or bullfighting, or fishing, or backyard chicken slaughter because they love the taste of meat. It's pleasure. Is there any difference? Because here and now in Lawrence, Kansas, we know that we can live healthfully and we can live good lives without participating in any of these. So the only justification for it is pleasure. Somebody gets enjoyment from it. And I thought it was very interesting what dolphin hunters say. Not only dolphins, but also other animals, including cows and pigs, display emotion and intelligence. We, however, cannot help killing them to eat their meat. Do people criticize these activities as barbaric? Then incident number 9 happens. I decide, upon seeing the meat and dairy and eggs growing and growing larger at the Merc, I'm going to go before the board. And I'm going to make a case to them. And I'm going to put as much information as I can about this in just a short 10-minute presentation to show them how the ends that the Merc already has would be most consistent with going the other direction, reducing meat, dairy, and eggs, and encouraging people to eat more plant-based. And that's the pitch I try to make to them. And some of the slides I show them are this one from the United Nations. Livestock are one of the most significant contributors to today's most serious environmental problems. Urgent action is required to remedy the situation. And I show them this from the WorldWatch Institute that says, as environmental science has advanced, it has become apparent that the human appetite for animal flesh is a driving force behind virtually every major category of environmental damage. Deforestation, erosion, freshwater scarcity, pollution, climate change, biodiversity loss, social injustice, and the spread of disease. And following that presentation, I get removed from the teaching schedule and not even told. It's not until I see the next schedule go up that I realize they made it and without me. So I drop in on my supervisor And I asked her about it, and she says, "Didn't you go before the board and make a presentation?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "You know, they were really uncomfortable with what you said there. And they said, if you would say those things to the board, what would you be saying in your classes?" So because I do believe I'm dealing with essentially good people who do care and are trying to do good things in the world, I said to my supervisor, "Are you telling me that as a member owner in good standing, if I go before the board to make a case for what I believe is the most ethical course, I risk losing my job here?" And then, "Oh, no, and I got my job back." Well, then a friend invites me to go on the Kaw Valley farm tour. Now this is you're probably familiar with it, all of you. It happens every year. It's about to happen in another weekend or two. We go on the tour and we start asking a lot of questions because most people don't know the questions to ask to find out where the things happening that aren't so humane happen. Many of them happen off the farm, out of sight, in ways that you wouldn't think to appreciate. So we ask those questions, and as a result of what I find out from the farmers, I have a blog, and I post the article to my blog, The Happy Meat and Dairy of Kaw Valley, where I explain the whole picture to people, and I express the opinion that this really isn't humane, what's happening to these animals, and here's why. Following that, some individuals, I presume the vendors who sell these products to the Merc, go into the Merc and they say, "Why is this woman Joanne Farr being allowed to teach here if these are her values?" And I lose my job for good. And I want to reiterate, I still believe these are good people at the Merc, at the board, working there. And that in most cases, they share my values about free speech, about cooperative values, about giving back to the community, about social justice. But this is just another example of how easily good people can get caught up in paradigms and perspectives and supporting entities based on survival of the entity to do things that are actually contrary to values that we all hold and care about. So the question is, if we can live good lives without causing intentional harm to beings who can suffer, should we do it? And if to address our fundamental challenge, it's worth asking what practices, behaviors, or customs might increase or decrease compassion and empathy in people. So I think a person who was actually born in 1910 and was 34 years old in 1944, named Donald Watson, has the key for us. Donald Watson and his wife coined the term vegan in 1944. They were the first humans on the planet to call themselves vegan. And he said, "We can see quite plainly that our present civilization is built on the exploitation of animals, just as past civilizations were built on the exploitation of slaves." And furthermore, he said that the word veganism denotes a philosophy